Good morning and welcome. I'm Frances Price, President of the Toronto Friends of the Visual Arts. Delighted to see so many of you on this very important day. This is the day that our prize winners are honoured, that the Artist Prize Committee have done all their work all year, working very hard to decide on these prize winners, and we get the benefit of all their work. The money that we pay for our membership goes to the prizes, so this is very important that we all know what we're contributing to. Now, before I introduce Stacey, I would like to do the land acknowledgement. We honour the ancestral guardians of this land and the many Indigenous peoples who continue to call this land home and act as its stewards. We are committed to being better treaty partners and to sharing the neighbouring First Nations the responsibility that extends to all who live on Turtle Island to care for this land for generations to come. Can you all hear? Oh. Sorry about that. I would like to introduce Stacey Sharp, Chair of the Artist Prize Committee.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Thank you, Frances. We are so fortunate to live in a city where we have such a vibrant and thriving arts community. Today, we're here to celebrate 3 artists whose practices stand out among their peers. Last fall, a select group of curators nominated 9 artists, and the Artist Prize Committee had the pleasure of visiting all of them. I'm pleased that the 8 members of this committee were unanimous in selecting these 3 finalists. I'd like to ask the 2 who are able to be with us today. Unfortunately, we're still waiting for Maria Hupfield, so perhaps she's in the hallway. Hooray. Timing is everything. I'll start with Alvin, if you wouldn't mind standing. Alvin Wong. We want to extend to you our warmest thanks and our acknowledgement for all that you do, and we look forward to hearing about your work. Unfortunately, Alexa Hatanaka is not able to be with us today. She has COVID, so we're kind of grateful that she's not here, but saddened as well. I'll wait and introduce Maria when she comes in. It is my true joy and honor to celebrate and collaborate with the Artist Prize Committee to identify and recognize such amazing talent and creativity. Just so you know, your Artist Prize Committee members are Sue Kidd, Kathy Parks, Martha Reeve, Susie Cololian, Yvonne Fleck, Sue Dime, Liz Lambert, and Pam Meredith. We are so blessed, yet again, to have Alex Bowron with us, and this year in person, for the presentation of our 3 Artist Prize finalists. Alex is a true friend of Toronto Friends. Alex has a broad education, which includes an MA in Critical and Cultural Theory from the University of Leeds, a BFA in Sculpture and Installation from OCAD University, and a BA in Religious Studies from the University of British Columbia. Alex is very well known to many of us, and of course, the broader Toronto arts community. She is currently Director of Gallery Nicolas Robert. Prior to that, Alex was Manager of Programs with the Canadian Art Foundation and also served as their auction manager for several years. In addition to Alex's curatorial work, she has held gallery assistant positions at MKG 127, Diaz Contemporary, Narwhal Contemporary, and the Canadian Sculpture Centre. Alex is a freelance writer of exhibition texts, essays for art publications, and reviews for galleries such as the Oakville Galleries, Arsenal, Cooper Cole, Zillucky Contemporary, and Susan Hobbs. Alex has recently shifted toward creative nonfiction writing and has joined a writer's workshop where she is exploring her greatest strength and passion, words. In addition to her busy career, Alex is also mother to 4-year-old Olive. Speaking personally, after a visit to her gallery and having an in-depth conversation about the artist and the exhibit, I thought to myself, I could listen to Alex all day long. I can't wait to hear what Alex has to say about Maria, Alvin, and Alexa. But before I turn it over to Alex, I just want to say hello to Maria. Thank you for finding your way here. And congratulations on becoming a finalist. I'd like to turn it over to Alex and introduce you, and hope you join me in giving her a warm welcome. Thank you.
What an incredibly sweet introduction. Thank you. But we're not here for me. We're here for these 3 artists. And I'm so happy that we are in this room together. I know that this is particularly special for many of you. It was a tough few years, to say the least. And this is my 5th year presenting. It's really quite an honor and a privilege because I've now met 15 artists, some of whom I knew of or knew well, and others I didn't. And they're always impressive and dynamic and committed. And I think the committee does an incredible job every year finding some of the more exciting artists working today. Yes. Oh, closer, really? I feel so loud. Okay. Is that better? Yeah? Okay. Microphones are not something I think most of us speak into on a regular basis. So yeah, the 3 artists we're meeting today, they all bring themselves directly into their work. That's something I noticed in all of their practices. It's incredibly personal work that they do. They're directly engaging with their materials and processes, as well as people, their audiences, other artists. There's a lot of collaboration that happens here. The actual art objects or videos or performances that come out of their work are all incredibly generous. They're really there to be seen and to be felt and to connect. And if it's one thing I noticed with all 3 of them is that the work has this ability to engage right away, and then it really leaves itself open to be discovered further. So for anyone who's willing and ready to spend some time with the work, they can really get an incredible reward from doing that. I remember first learning about research-based practices when I was in art school and thinking that that was something I definitely wanted to learn more about. And through my time in the art world, I've discovered that actually some of the best work being made, applying the word research-based is almost as redundant as saying something like multimedia or time-based. I think at this point, good work that's really invested, is research-based. I mean, that's it's sort of not really, doesn't really exist without that. And I think the best artists today are really using whatever materials and processes they need in order to express the research that they do. So without further ado, we will move on to Alexa, who is, as Stacy mentioned, sadly not able to be here. One thing I love about this role is that I do get to meet each of the artists, and my visit with Alexa was really quite special. I hope you'll all get to meet her at some point. So Alexa Atanaka is a TFVA Artist Prize finalist for 2023. She works sculpturally through performance, cross-disciplinary, and community-based practices. Her work is grounded in sustainable processes, exploring themes related to resilience of nature, generational knowledge, and historic processes connected to her Japanese heritage. Much of Alexa's work includes relief printmaking, papermaking, and kamiko, which is the practice of sewing garments out of konnyaku starch-strengthened washi, or Japanese paper. One thing that stood out to me during my visit with her was how honestly she's come by creating wearable sculpture, which is another thing that kind of gets thrown around a lot. I think I've seen many attempts at doing that that aren't nearly as successful as what I see in Alexa's work. With her, it really feels like a very logical step with the material she chose and this line that she's pushing between fashion and art and clothing and sculpture. And the objects do function as wearable objects, many of them, and they do get worn. She told me about a musician, for example, who wore one of her vests for a performance, which was a rather, sweaty affair. And that's something that got us talking about how incredibly resilient washi paper actually is. When you think of paper, if you aren't aware of this particular type of paper, you might not necessarily imagine that it can sustain the kind of sort of rigor that comes from wearing something. So her work, yeah, it's actually, it was impressive to me how sculptural she makes clothing and how she really weaves and sort of collages different styles and textures of paper and print together. And another interesting facet of this work, I think, because a lot of it is worn, but also because it can go through so many processes, is that the pieces actually feel like they contain this kind of energy of their history that's almost like a patina of a sort of metaphorical and literal history of their existence. They bring a traditional knowledge and practice of paper making together with more contemporary materials and processes. And they also contain marks of their history, their making, and their use. Here we have a piece from 2017, which is called Nuna/Land Arena. This one was exhibited at the AGO. It comes from a line of work that was inspired by Alexa's work in Kingate in Nunavut. It's a wide, I mean, she spent many years there working very closely with the community. There's quite a connection there between some of the traditional Japanese approaches to papermaking and printmaking that's also practiced there. A piece like this, which is actually made from linoleum flooring, which was left over after a high school burned down. So of course it's a very loaded material. And so she's salvaged that material and then printed on top of it in this incredibly topographic manner. It speaks a little bit to the idea of mapping and breaking the grid. There's an absence and a presence happening here and an incredible softness to the pattern that she's created. Of course, there are themes of climate change that she's addressing quite regularly. And a piece like this would never have really been made without a community effort, because she spent so much time in Nunavut learning from the people who are there and the people who are also experiencing climate change in a very direct, day-to-day way. This is a piece that was shown at MoCA in Toronto for GTA 21. So a couple years ago. It's a lino cut and wood cut on handmade Gampi paper, and it's a collaboration that Alexa underwent with a Nunavut artist named Ashuna. And I can say from having seen it, I'm not sure how many of you have actually seen this in person, but it has this incredible sculptural quality, but also very ethereal. Like because it's paper and it's very, from a distance, it looks like it has sort of more physical substance than it actually does. And when you move in the room, even the slightest shift in the air will cause the piece to wave ever so slightly. And because it's hanging out from the wall, it has this these tiny sort of cracks of light, which you can just sort of see in the left-hand side that go through the piece and really bring it into the physical space around it. It's a really effective piece, a really beautiful piece. I think Alexa's work, paper really becomes in her work a symbol for resilience, as well as representing a connection to the land and to the earth. And it can also feel a bit like an armor and almost futuristic in some of the ways that she works with it. This is an example of that. This is her first paper hazmat suit, which was acquired by the National Gallery and exhibited there as well. Might even still be on display. And this work is very typical of the way that Alexa walks holds several different feelings and emotions in the work that she makes. In some ways, it's about grief and isolation, environmental disaster, but it's also very much about kinship and interconnectedness and resilience. And of course, it's quite strikingly beautiful, and I think walks such an interesting line between traditional processes and a contemporary feel. That's where she really gets into this kind of fashion side of things. This final slide is an image of Alexa's studio. When she spent some time in Kochi, Japan, at a residency at a Japanese paper mill. So she did actually get to go and learn how to create washi in the traditional way, which, if you ever want to look it up, is incredibly fascinating. It all happens in nature. The paper comes from the fibers, it's washed in the rivers, the whole process happens directly on the land and with human hands. And the paper itself is entirely biodegradable, so that it's an incredible process where it sort of comes out of the earth, can become something, and then can return to the earth as well. Alexa often activates her sculptures with light, which you can see even in her studio, and if you visit her studio in Toronto, she's often hanging things in the windows, and I think you can see how effective that is because you get more material ambiguity there as well. Like it almost feels like stained glass. The piece in the center there. The piece on the left, I wish Alexa was here because I think that's the vest the musician wore, which was another really interesting story. And on the right, you see the piece of clothing that's actually being worn in the image in the bottom right there. So Alexa will actually be returning to Japan in 2024, next year. She'll be exhibiting work at the Ino-Cho Paper Museum, which is nearby the same paper mill where she was a resident. And in the meantime, she is, as all of three artists are, very busy with many upcoming projects. I think she said she's going to Fogo Island this summer, as well as a trip to New York City, among other things. So now we'll move on to Alvin Long. Alvin is a TFVA Artist Prize finalist for 2023. Much like Alexa's work, Alvin's also is imbued with incredible tactile material qualities that really ask to be experienced and in many ways touched. I feel that when I look at his work. I always want to grab it, even though I know I can't. He works in sculpture, performance, video, photography, also in very collaborative ways. And he merges his own biographical lineages with diasporic working class community dialogues that are focused on stories of land and migration. And Alvin is also working quite a bit with themes that are focused around climate change. This work that we're seeing here was exhibited recently as part of a solo show that was titled After the Cataclysm Before the Storm at Whippersnapper Gallery, which has a storefront that's located in Toronto's downtown Chinatown. The project was an accumulation of almost a year-long residency that Alvin did at Gallery TPW. And he credits many years of conversations in the making of this work, as well as collaborations. In the show specifically, there are 2 new commissioned videos that he worked with 2 Ho Chi Minh City-based artists to make, as well as a commissioned text from an artist in Hanoi in Vietnam. So these specific sculptures are actually made out of preserved pork, and they're reinterpretations of combat uniforms that were worn during the American-Vietnam War by forces in the South. They function as an homage to anti-conscription efforts. So Alvin's grandmother and other women in their community would participate in these efforts by engaging in a coding system, by hanging certain things in the windows at different times to warn their communities of the approach of conscription officers so they could protect their fighting-aged men and boys from that. I didn't see this in person, and I lament that to this day, because I think, I mean, you can say this about any work, but I think work like this, if you're standing in the space with it, I think would really engage quite a few of your senses, and I think there'd be quite a bodily response to this. This piece is really a bit of a masterpiece. That's a weird word, but I'm going to use it. It's titled Ration Market Special, and it functions as a sort of mobile food stall for distributing rations, and also offers the promise of things like SIM cards and currency exchange. I think it's an extremely effective symbol, which Alvin's been working with, sort of creating objects that feel like they might actually be needed in not so long a time. So it really does address the evolving climate crisis and the refugee situation that comes out of that, humans having to flee places where they can no longer live because of climate change. This is the piece in Union Station, which is where it was installed. So it was in a public space, and also a space where people are coming and going on a regular basis. It really is a bit of an apocalyptic vision. I think it's an incredibly effective, sort of humble in its own way, but then it has all these codes in it to draw you in and really consider what it's offering and what it's presenting to you. The food rations are actually edible as well, which is a really interesting part of this piece. Alvin's engaged in performances of relational aesthetics, where he's been involving food in his work as well, and consuming food. So these pieces, the bricks that you see here, are actually made from dehydrated river spinach, which is a green that grows wild in Vietnam. And it's a green that's quite loaded for many people who did live through the American-led war. It's associated to many with a certain degree of trauma, because it was actually the main nutritional source for many Vietnamese people during that time, and also including Alvin's family in the aftermath of the war. It still grows wild, and it grows in marshland. It actually grows best in very heavily saturated land that's saturated with water. And I learned from Alvin that Ho Chi Minh City is predicted to be completely underwater by 2050. There are a few places that we know this now. And this vegetable really functions sort of as a symbol of survival of itself and the earth, but also of the humans that might still require it to live. There are a few more food rations in this food stall. So these are actually, I was double checking with Alvin yesterday, the contents of each bag, which in Vietnam and other parts of Southeast Asia, when you're buying food on the streets, you'll receive it in this way sometimes. You have reconstituted river spinach, a sort of slurry of river spinach, a rice porridge or congee, crispy onions, and a fish sauce. So it's sort of like a complete meal that you have there, but it's packaged in a way that you can kind of grab and go and have when you need. Alvin's ongoing themes of rationing and refugees fleeing climate is visible in his photography and video work as well. This is neither, actually. This is a print. It's actually a billboard print of a housing development that's been sort of soiled in a way and saturated by this rising flood of algae-rich water. Or it could also be seen sort of like a green tide of river spinach that's also, of course, alluding to this idea of the human development being underground. The piece is titled A Voluminous Crush, and it was selected for display actually at the headquarters of the Rockefeller Foundation in New York. So that's where it was hanging, or is still hanging, maybe. Yeah. So these are two pieces from a recent exhibition that Alvin had at Hunt Gallery in Toronto, which I did manage to see. This is a really interesting series of work that's focused more around mining personal photographs from past travels. And he's producing sculptural installations and photographic installations of computer manufactured imagery They really weave a bit of a dystopic narrative around the inevitable impacts of climate change. We see that here in this sort of feeling that these images have been soaked for some time, or that they might have been left over from something that you might uncover in the future. The piece on the left, for example, is a photo of a river fish in Alvin's uncle's home in Ho Chi Minh City. And it's been made to appear as a sort of damaged light box with its diffuser and fluorescent bulbs stained and washed out. Again, as though they're sort of something that's been damaged by a flood. Alvin is currently developing new work for Nuit Blanche in 2023, so look out for that. I think it's in the Etobicoke section is the plan. He's also working on an offsite project at the Agnes Etherington Art Center in Kingston, and has just been longlisted for the Sobey Art Award, which maybe some of you have heard about. Yep, well deserved. So, Maria Hupfield is TFVA's Artist Prize winner for 2023. Maria employs a range of materials and processes towards sculptural objects that extend into performance, public engagement, and collaboration with other artists and with her audiences. She's interested in the production of shared moments that open spaces for possibility and new narratives, and I really did feel that when speaking with her. She's incredibly easy to talk to. We had a really nice connection. We were speaking when she was still in her residency in California. It must be a bit of a shock to be back. Maria is an urban off-reservation member of the Anishinaabeg people. She belongs to Wasauksing First Nation in Ontario. And she is currently assistant professor and Canadian Research Chair at the Daniels Faculty at U of T. She's co-owner of Native Art Department with her husband, Jason. And she's also a founding member of the Indigenous Kinship Collective in New York City. The thing that struck me immediately when diving into Maria's practice was the way that she uses humor and play and dance and to create her moments and to activate her sculptures, but she still maintains a real sort of seriousness and a studiousness to her work. So I find that quite interesting, this sort of like hovering between play and actually taking on quite significant issues. Her work is both approachable and it's dense in its content. Her pieces are incredibly tactile, at times almost opulent, like you see these boxing gloves here on the left, which I haven't seen in person, but the minute I got that image, I wish I had. There's something, again, about this work that I mentioned in Alvin's where you want to hold it. Like it's taken from recognizable parts of the world and sort of manipulated ever so slightly to put it into a bit of a realm of absurdity or an area that you question and want to know more about. This is an installation from an exhibition she had at Hugues Charbonneau Gallery in Montreal in 2021. It's titled Storywork, and it's a selection of pieces that were created over a decade of living in Brooklyn in New York. I think it's very interesting to think about Maria's work in terms of storytelling. It makes a lot of sense, and each object is sort of, in many ways, seems to be born out of some level of intuition and direct engagement, and then it's woven into a larger story and a bigger picture after that. And an exhibition like this feels very much like that. So several of these pieces were actually from past performances, and many of them involved other people as well. So there's this idea of sort of shared stories. So even in a gallery setting, you get this the feeling that there were people that were connected to these objects. So Maria is very committed to collaborative practices and to hands-on experiences and direct dialogue with her audiences. Her 5-year research program in Indigenous digital arts and performance at U of T has 3 components. This is really an incredible program. The first is a community medicine garden. The second is an Indigenous creation studio. And the third is a living archive. And the program seeks to change the ways that universities are accountable to Indigenous peoples and to model new ways of connecting with Indigenous communities through arts-based practices. And it also establishes respectful ongoing relationships with Indigenous people and the land. Name me more important work than that. I don't know. I mean, it's incredible to think about the way that Maria also navigates the world of academia and art. Those two worlds don't necessarily easily merge. I'm sure there's quite a bit of negotiation that happens. And when we talked about being present and being momentary while everything around you is constantly moving. We talked a lot about sort of following leads and being open to signs and really following your sort of gut when it comes to creative practices. Maria is really deeply invested in an embodied practice, and as I mentioned, she often does activate the creations that her sculptures that she makes by using her own body and creating live performances. So in this case, you see like this sculpture, which really stands alone as an object, can also be worn as a cape and is adorned with these objects, these jingles that actually create a sound as well as they move. And in many of her performances, she might be wearing or carrying or pulling or in some way engaging with the objects. And sometimes she makes an object and then years into the future, she will use it again. Like it doesn't necessarily go away. Nothing is sort of made for one moment necessarily and then abandoned. It all kind of has the potential to return. We see this in this series, which is a series of images that are sort of like stills from a dance performance. And she's holding an object that actually was made in 2013, but the images are from 2023. And I believe Jen will be showing these in NADA this week? Yeah? Yeah, so these will be in, or maybe already are in New York. So as a whole, Maria is incredibly ambitious, as are the other artists here today, and Alexa, who is not here. But she's also incredibly grounded as an artist, at least from my perspective. Her projects position Indigenous arts as a technologically advanced and active living presence across time and into the future. And she really aims to build networks of awakened solidarity. So fueling movements for resurgence, for decolonization, and reclamation of Indigenous homelands in North America. Maria has many things coming up, including a performance at Bard College in New York. She's working on a book project as well. I mentioned she just got back from the Lucas Artist Residency Program, which looked incredibly beautiful at the Montalvo Art Center in California. And she'll also be the inaugural artist in residence with the Ravines for Artworks Toronto. So that concludes the presentation. I'd like to thank the membership for honoring these artists, so incredibly deserving as always. And congratulations, Maria and Alvin and Alexa. It really was a pleasure meeting you, and I look forward to seeing what the future holds. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Sue Kidd. I had the privilege of being on the committee with Stacy. Thank you, Alex, for an amazing presentation. As always, you speak so articulately about work. I'm sure the artists were both really pleased. I encourage you to go down to Nicholas Robert on Niagara and ask a few questions. I guarantee if you didn't like the art when you went in, you'll like it when you go out. I'd really like to thank Stacy. You did an amazing job this year of herding the cats. It's an extreme privilege to meet people like Alvin and Maria, and you make us look at the world differently. And your histories and your presentations excite us, and I hope that you continue to do that. So I smell coffee. enjoy. Thanks for coming.